Okay, today's video tutorial is going to go over a couple things here. I'm going to show how to create this render right here. So in order to create this render, I'm going to first need to model the room itself. So I'm going to show you some techniques to model the foundation of your room, meaning the walls, the ceiling, and the floor, as well as creating just the basic windows. And then the second half is going to focus on lighting here. So when kind of navigating this video, the first half is going to go over modeling. The second half is going to go over how to get the lighting as such where these light rays are kind of pouring through the windows and you can see that atmosphere happening there. So we're going to be adding atmosphere into the scene so that the light shows up visibly in the render with these light rays here. So this is kind of a preview of what we're going to have at the end product here. So I'm going to start with the new scene here. So just go File, New Scene, and it won't save. And so we're going to start from scratch here. And so to start things off, what I like to do, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do this, but this is the way that I like to work here, is I like to start with a polygon cube right here, and I'll scale it up. And depending on the kind of room you want to do, that'll determine how many subdivisions you want to create with this. So if you just want like a window, you might not want any subdivisions at all right here. But if you have a room that's going to be lined with, let's say, 6 windows or something like that on the right side, what you might want to do, and I'm going to need to rescale my interface real quick. So what you might need to do in that case is when you're going to the attribute editor and going to the third tab with the room selected here, is give yourself the right amount of subdivisions that way so that when we extrude the windows, you can just kind of have more to work with right there. So how many subdivisions you do is going to be determined a lot by what kind of room you're making here. And so you could start with it just being 1, 1, and 1, and we can use the multi-cut tool to create your own edge loops here. Or you can kind of start with some subdivisions. One thing I would say is with the height, I like to start with 3. And the way I think about it is if I'm creating a window, this edge loop right here will end up being the top of the window, and this edge loop right there will be the bottom of the window. And I'm pretty consistent with that one when I'm creating a room here. So I'll start with that. I'll give this one 2. And I'm going to have 2 windows. So, but I'm going to use the multi-cut tool to create them right here. So I'm just going 2, 3, 2 right here for mine. And okay, so we have a box here for our room. And I'm going to scale this up so that it's, oops, so that it's large. When I scaled it up just then, you can see some of those edges are selected in there, even though it's in object mode. So it caused it to scale up strangely there. So just going to scale it up this way. Something I like to do here as well is you can see that the grid is kind of hovering right in the middle of the room right there. And I'm pressing 4 to go to wireframe, 5 to go back to shaded. And something I like to do is I like to just move my room so that it is right above that box right there. And something that'll kind of make your life a lot easier, I think, when you start to place objects and things like that. So we're kind of doing this step, and it might not seem like it's doing a lot now, but it'll help out in the future when you start importing the tables and all the things that you've modeled and importing them into your room. Is I like to tap spacebar. I'm pressing F and all those different views right there. And remember when you tap D, so I'm not holding D, I just tapped it, and that allows you to change your anchor point right here. And if you hold down V as in vampire, you can snap the anchor point to these relevant edge loops in your room. And so I'm just going to put it at the bottom right there. And so now my anchor point is hooked to the bottom of my room. And next what I can do is I'll look at the front view right here, and I'll tap 4 just to go to wireframe mode. So I'm not in that anchor point moving D mode right there. I'm in just the normal W move mode right here. And if I hold down X this time, as in Xerox, you can see that the object snaps to the grid right here. So the grid is in centimeters, and I'm just going to bring it right up to that base level right there. And so now my room is sitting right on top of my grid right there. And so that way the grid won't be in the way. And something else that'll be future is when you're importing your tables and all the sofas and all the other things that you're modeling and putting into your room, you can snap those the same way to the floor, and everything will just be on the floor, lined up correctly. So that's step one. And I'm just going to scale up my room a little bit more. I want it to have a little bit of a high ceiling. And you can see the grid is that size. Remember the centimeters. So this is still kind of a miniature I'm working with here. You want your room to not be too big and not too small. If it's too small and it's smaller than this grid right here, it's going to be really hard to work with when you're dealing with lighting and some other things here. And if it's too big, then it can just start to get unwieldy in that direction. So I like to just, in the scheme of things, I make my models on the smaller side. And this is kind of about the size that I stick with for the room approximately here. So I'm pressing 5 to go back to shaded mode. So you can see that this is a gray box right here. We're on the outside, but we're going to be rendering things from the inside. That's what we're going to be working on here. And if I zoom in here, you can see that the faces go from gray to black. And whenever the faces appear black, that means that it's inside out. And so what I'm going to do to fix that is I'm just going to select my model and object mode right here. And if you go up to mesh display and then reverse right here. So mesh display right here, and then it's the third down, reverse. And when you reverse it, it'll turn orange right there. If I zoom out, now the outside is black and the inside is gray. So whenever you need to flip it, that's what you do, is you just go to mesh display and then reverse right there. So I have that step done. So next up is I'm preparing this for animation. If you're preparing it for a video game or room, you probably need it to be modeled in every direction, right? Because you're creating a full interactive environment for your audience. But for animation, we're thinking of it more as like a stage play kind of thing. And so I don't really need, if I'm going to have my camera angle set up in this direction right here, I don't necessarily really need these other two walls right here. And so something you could do is just delete them, but a lot of the times it can be helpful. You might want to bring them back for some reason or another here. So what I'm going to show is how you can extract some of these different components right here. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to right click, go to face mode, and I'm going to extract this back wall first. So I'm selecting those faces right there in face mode. Then I tap 4 to make sure I didn't select any other faces by mistake, tap 5. And I can find the extract button in 2 different places. So one place where you can find the extract button is if you hold down shift and you right click. So I'm holding down shift and then I'm holding down right click, and you can find, where is it? Extract faces right there. So you can do it right there. Or you can go up to edit mesh and then down to extract right here. And those will do the same thing. So edit mesh and extract is another way to do it. So I'll just click on that, give it 1 sec. It'll have to think about it just for 1 moment. And you can see right here in the outliner, I initially had my poly surface 1, which was the room, and then I made a poly surface 2. So they're now 2 different objects, and it grouped them. And the grouping is kind of annoying. I kind of wish I didn't do that, but anyway. So when I press W, I now have the room right here. I'll press Command Z to undo that. And then I have this back wall right here. So I've separated the back wall right there into a separate object. So now I'm going to do the same thing for the side wall. You know what? Let's see. I'm going to name these after. I'm going to extract all these and then I'm going to organize them and name them. So right click face. So, or sorry, hold down right click and go to face mode. I'm holding shift. Uh-oh, my computer's freezing. Give it 1 moment here. My computer just froze. There we go. We're back. Wow, that was a major freeze right there. Okay, so selected those 6 faces. Tap 4. Make sure that I didn't select any of the wrong faces. I'll tap 5 again. And I'm going to do the same thing where I just go to edit mesh and then down to extract right there. And I'll press Q to get out of it and press W. Oops. Go to object mode, sorry, and press W. And you can see that that wall is detached. This wall is detached. I'm going to do it 1 more time for the ceiling. And so the reason I'm detaching these is I like having them available in case I need them, but I can hide them, and hiding them's really easy here. So it's just so you have it. I find this to be, there's a lot of times where doing this has been really helpful for me. So last up, I'm going to do the ceiling, tap 4 to make sure I didn't select any wrong faces, tap 5 again. And I'm going to do the same thing, edit mesh down to extract. And so now I have my main room right here. I have the ceiling, I have the back wall, and I have the side wall right there. And then the outliner is a bit of a mess right here. So this is a really helpful thing that this tutorial is going to help go over here, is kind of managing groups and organizing your outliner right here. So you can see it put everything into a group, and you can expand a group by pressing this plus button here. And then within it, it kind of kept creating a new group each time I extracted something. So you can see the groups also are indicated by this gray diagonal box with a red arrow in it. That's an indication that you have a group right there. And so I'm just going to keep pressing plus until there's nothing left to press plus on anymore. And I'm going to take the models, which are indicated by this gray icon right here with the 4 faces on it. And I'm going to move them out of the group. And so to move them out of the group, if you do a normal click and you try to drag, it's almost like it's doing shift select. So a normal click doesn't work here. So what you have to do is you have to press down on your mouse wheel. So it's the middle mouse button on your mouse. So if you hold down your mouse wheel, your middle mouse button, a little plus will show up, and then you can drag this up right there. So I'm just dragging that out of the group, and I'm just going to keep kind of excavating these models out of the group here into plain sight. So middle mouse click, I'm dragging, and you can see right here, if I drag it right there where there's that one dotted line right there, it's going to just put it where I want it to go. If I click it and I drag it and then it outlines around something else, that means it's going to get grouped underneath whatever you're dragging it into. So just make sure when you're dragging it, you just get that one dotted line and not a dotted line box here. So I'm just continuing to click and drag these out. So in the end, if you followed along with me here, you should have 4 objects here. So I have the ceiling right here. So I'm going to rename that by, oh, right, in this program, we double clicking on it. And I'll name it ceiling. This is my side wall right here. So double click, side wall. This is the main room. And then finally I have the back wall right here. Okay. And so down here, I just have empty groups that the computer made when I was extracting. So I'm just going to select that and delete it to get out of the way. We don't need it. That's just going to get in the way at this point. And so finally, what I'm going to do, and this is just so I can stay as organized as possible here, is one thing I might recommend doing is grouping this. So to group this all back together again, you can press Command and then G as in group, and it creates a new group right there. And I'll just call this room group right there. Okay, and so why did we do that? So the reason that I did that is a lot of times when you're rendering something, you want to kind of create a stage for yourself. And these walls, if I'm trying to set up a camera and set up a camera angle, these walls can really get in the way. If you ever kind of set foot onto an actual set production for a film or a TV show, they're not modeling the whole, or the carpenters aren't creating the whole room, they're just creating one side of it, right? So what I can do here is I can just select this wall, press H right there, and it doesn't delete it, it just hides it. So that was the back wall. I'm gonna select the side wall right here and press H again. And again, that hides it. And then right here with the ceiling, I can press H once more, and then it hides it. And whenever you want to bring them back, you can just go find the ceiling in your outliner, press H, and it's right back to where it was again. Okay, so we have this kind of initial setup here. And I'm going to press this button right here, which is wireframe unshaded, just so that whenever this is unselected, you can kind of see the topology, meaning the line flow that I have here. And what you do here is going to depend a little bit on the room you're creating right here. So what I'm creating is a pretty basic room. I'm going to create a room with just 2 windows on this side and then a door on this side right here. And what I like to do here is I like to think of this room as a foundation. And I'm not going to go in right now and be modeling the windowsill and all that stuff. I'm just basically trying to create the literal floor, the walls and the ceiling, and the holes go where the windows are gonna go kind of thing here. So let's say that I want a window here and I want a window on this side right here. And I plan on setting up my camera kind of at this angle right here. And we might also create a door over on this side right here. So what I like to do is I like to use the multi-cut tool. And remember with the multi-cut tool, I have to make sure that my object is selected here. So you go to the multi-cut tool. And remember, if you hold down Control, you can make new edge loops with it right here. If you hold down Control Shift, it snaps to increments right here. And the degree of increments right now, so it's going by 5-degree increments right now. But if you want it to be more than that, you just go right here. So if I want it to cut everything directly in half, I just type 50 in here. And if I hold Control and then additionally hold down Shift, it snaps it right to 50 degrees right there. And so now it allows me to kind of split things directly in half right there. Let's just do, I'll do 20. So let me look at this. Okay. So I'm going to do 20 right there. And let's do 40 right there. And it actually doesn't matter too much exactly where you line these up unless you need it to be really exact, because we can move these really easily here. And so what I'm trying to do is, so this is going to end up being my first window right here. There's going to be a little bit of a space between it and then the next window, which comes over here. Then I want another space right here before it gets to that wall. So I need one more multi-cut, and I'm just going to do it over here. And let's go ahead and make these even, if I can. All right, I'll need to do that by eye. That's okay. So this is going to be a window. That's going to be a window right there. And before I even delete out those faces, which we are going to do eventually, is before I even do that, what I like to do is I like to right click, go to edge mode, and you're just going to slide edges around. So you just double click an edge, then you press W and you can move it around. And you can see that the model itself isn't changing, right? It's just kind of changing the size of those faces right there. And so I'm going to kind of adjust this to these edges right here. So I'm just pressing, double clicking them and then pressing W to move them. And I might want to do the same. I might want the window to be taller right here. So if I want it to be taller, one easy way to do it so that it's equidistant here is I press R for the scale tool. I can scale it up. So now the window is going to be really, really tall right there. So again, this edge loop right there indicates the top of the windows. That'll be the bottom of the windows right there. Or you can just manually move them right here. You can also select 2 edge loops at the same time, move them closer. So I'm just kind of thinking about it. So I'm just moving these windows so that they line up okay. I might like these windows to kind of at least appear like they're the same size as one another. So I might rely on the orthographic view right here to help me space them. So I'm looking at the side view right here. That's actually looking pretty good to me. Right there. So those two are looking pretty even. I'm just pressing F on each orthographic view just so that those frame up a little bit better. And okay, so we have what's going to end up being our windows right here, right there, and right there. Let me go ahead and I'm going to create a door over here. And so for the door, I'm going to do the multi-cut tool again, hold down Control and Shift, or you can just hold down Control. And I'm making a new edge loop right there. And I kind of want the door to be taller than these windows right here. You know, so this is going to be the door, or these faces right there. And I don't want it to be the exact same height as the windows. Rooms aren't typically like that. Usually one is taller than the other. And one thing you could do is you could just select this edge, press W and move it up, but you can see that this topology becomes uneven right there. And there's a lot of times when you're building a room that you want this edge flow to stay consistent right here. So what I would rather do is use the multi-cut tool again, hold down Control, and I'm just looking right there, oops, right there. And so now the door is going to be those 3 faces right there. And I can just adjust this edge loop as I need to. So double clicking, press W if I want it to be a little taller. Oh, whoops, I see what happened. My hand slipped and There we go. I created that edge loop right there by mistake. Give me 1 second. Okay, so now if I want this door to be thinner, I can just select that edge loop right there, just move it in a little bit. If I want it to be taller, I'm selecting that edge loop, moving it up a little bit. And for the door, and we could kind of do the same thing for the windows as well, is so I have those 3 faces right there. I just press Control and click that one to deselect it. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to delete this. You know, you could delete it and make your doorway right there. But what I'd rather do is I'd rather extract this. And so, because when it comes time to model the door, I can just start with these faces right here and begin there. So I'm just going to right click, or sorry, you can either go to edit mesh and then extract right there, or you can hold down shift, right click, and then go down to extract faces right there. And I'll press Q. Oops, and go back to objects mode here. And so now you can see it's its own separate object right there. And so now, and it kind of created another group within things right here. So this is the door, so I'll rename that. Middle mouse click, drag it back into the group. It kind of took my room and it renamed it annoyingly. So I'll double click on that. Middle mouse click, click delete right there. So now I have the door as a separate piece of geometry, and I could do the same thing for these windows right here. And you know what? I think I am going to, in fact, do that. So a lot of the times I just right click and face and delete these real quick and have that be my windows. But you're going to want to have some glass in there. And so we can later save these and just have those be the glass planes, and then they'll line up perfectly well right here. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to select those 2 faces right there, hold down shift, right click, go down to extract faces. Remember, you can also find that under edit mesh. So right there. So the windows are just right there, separated as their own object right there. So I have window 1, middle mouse click, drag it back into the group. I have window 2, double click, rename it, middle mouse click, drag it back into the group. Then it renames my room yet again. So main 3, middle mouse click, drag it into the group, and I'll just delete this group right here. Okay, and so, oops, right click, I'm going to go to objects mode. And so for the time being, I can just hide these windows right here. And what I'll do later, eventually, is I'll add a glass shader onto these. But for now, I'm going to hide them. So they're out of the way right there. And I'm going to leave the door visible right there. So we essentially have our room here. And what I recommend that you do is I really like to, as long as I'm modeling this room and I'm making changes to it, I like to keep it as a flat kind of, you know, almost like a paper cutout situation thing right here. But at a certain point, we're going to want to extrude it because, you know, a window, when you look at it from this angle, it's not paper thin like that. There's some depth to it. So in order to give this some depth, I'm just going to select the main room right here in objects mode. And then I'm going to go over to extrude in the modeling toolkit. Tap extrude. And over here, if you drag these arrows, essentially what we're going to eventually do is we're going to change the thickness right here. Kind of spoiler alert right there. So if you drag the green arrow, it's going to extrude in a really weird way. If you grab the red arrow and extrude, it's going to extrude in a really weird way. And at first, when you grab the blue arrow and extrude, it looks like it's doing it right. But if you notice, as I pull this out, it's pulling it out pretty unevenly right there. And so we don't actually want that. So if you do the thickness slider, and I'm actually going to drag this into a negative direction right here. And I'm going to extrude it out that way. You can see when I'm dragging it down to a negative number, it extrudes outward like that. And the whole model turns black, but we can fix that really easily with mesh display in reverse right there. If I drag this to a positive number, you can see right here, it's not the end of the world if you do this, by the way, but if I drag it to a positive number, you can see that the room is coming in. And I've already kind of set the floor plane where I want it. So I like to do a negative number right here. So negative, maybe -1 right here, maybe a -1.5. You can also type it in right here, -1.5 return. Oops. And I'll press Q to get out of extrude mode. And you can see by extruding it that way that the thickness is consistent with the model right there. So it doesn't do any funny business there. And so to fix this, I can just go to mesh display and then reverse right there. And then this thing's ready to go. So now we have our room modeled right here. And, you know, there's more I could do to it, but the basic concept of what we're doing here is set forth here is I have my windows, I have my door right there, which I'll later extrude to kind of turn into its own object. And then we'll import other things that we've modeled, lamps, tables, all that stuff into this environment right here. And if you need more windows, you'll just kind of keep doing these same techniques over and over again. Now, let's say, for instance, I'm going to save this just in case my computer freezes again. So, and let's see here, where was I? Oh yeah, so let's just say, for instance, you've extruded it and you want to create another window and things like that. You can do that. So, or let's say you want to reposition things here. So let's say I want this window to be narrower right here, but we've extruded. The way that I would typically do that is I would go into face mode, and that's often a good way to kind of make some of these changes right here. So let's say, for instance, that I want to make this window thinner, is I'm just going into face mode and setting my camera at a really good angle right there. A safer option might just be to make your selections in the orthographic view right here. So you can see right there, I just selected those faces right there. And I might need to select one more face. Let me just see this. Nope, that's all you need is, so again, I'm just, if I want this window to kind of reposition over here, so I just right click, go to face mode. I try to find the most easy way to select it in the orthographic view mode right there. So I just made a selection just by dragging and selecting like that. And so now it selected the faces all the way around right there. And it doesn't matter if those faces are selected right there. If I press W, I can physically move this around. I can also scale it, you know, so I can make the window narrower like that. And yeah, there's just kind of a lot that we can kind of continue to adjust and make here. Cutting a new window out is a little trickier right here. And so that's why I want you all to kind of cut the holes for the windows that you want while this is still a flat object, because once it's extruded, it gets a little more tricky to create new windows. So if I were to create a new window here, I'll just create one way over here in the corner right there. So I just did the multi-cut tool, held control, created two edge loops right there. And so here, if I right click and select those faces right there, press 4 just to make sure I didn't select anything wrong. And then I delete it. It creates a window, but you can, I don't know if you can see this here, but there's a gap here now between these two sides right here, which is a little unsightly. Whereas since I did it earlier before, there's actually faces there filling in the gap. And filling in these gaps can be a little tricky sometimes. Let's see if it works this time. So I'll right click, go to edge. I'll select those two edges right there. And there's a tool over here called bridge right here. Let's see if it works. So if I click bridge, it bridges the gap there. So I did it on the bottom first, and I'll do it on the top now. So I'm just selecting this edge. So I'll right click, go to edge mode. I select this edge, hold shift, select that edge, bridge, and it did it that time. Press Q. And the order that you do this in might matter. So if this doesn't work for you, try starting on the top and the bottom and then moving to the sides here. It shouldn't, but I feel like I remember that messing up on me once before. So for the sides, I just hold shift, select those two edges right there, find bridge right there. Something a little weird happened there. You know, let's see here. I'll have to look into what caused that problem here in a moment. I'll hold shift. Let me just edit undo. Let's see if I do it one more time, if it goes better this time. Okay, same problem. And it fills incorrectly there. Sometimes in Maya, usually when a face or an object appears green, that means that there's not a shader assigned to that material. So yeah, there's some kind of problem happening there. And if that happens to you, I have a feeling if I go to the hyper shade, I'll just try to solve this real quick. Let me drag the Lambert. There we go. So this, when you see this green right here, it means that there's not a material assigned to this. And so just go to the hypershade right here, which is this button right here. Go to the hypershade, which is what we're going to be kind of doing next in our process. And this is all Lambert right here, which is Maya's default material, which is just a matte gray, no reflections, nothing fancy going on. And I just reapply the Lambert. So you can just do that by, I middle mouse clicked and dragged it on. You can also select the object right here in objects mode. So right click object mode, select the object, then right click here. Uh-oh, am I freezing again? Let's see, right click here. It's been difficult today, but usually, there we go. Assign shader to selection right there, and that'll fix that problem if that shows up for you. So that's how you create a new window if the model's already extruded out in the 3 dimensions here. So I think that's enough time spent on modeling here. And we'll probably need to bring the ceiling back for lighting. So I'll just press H, unhide it. And so now we have the ceiling kind of returned back into action here. And so now let's get into lighting. So there's essentially 3 lights that we're going to add on to the scene right here. We're going to have an area light that's going to come in through the windows that's going to emulate sunlight. And then we're going to create a skydome light and put an HDRI map onto it to project on a kind of a room or environment onto the room right here to kind of create some ambient light and help with photorealism. And then finally, it's not technically a light, but we're going to add atmosphere into the scene, and that's going to contribute to the lighting here. So before we start on any of that though, this is all Lambert material right here. And what I like to do is I like to just get everything, when I start to kind of change gears from modeling to rendering, is I like to change everything from a Lambert over to an Arnold shader right here. So we're going to go to the hypershade, which again is this button right here. Click on that. And we just have the default materials in there now. And what I want to do is I want to skip past favorites, skip by Maya, go down to Arnold, and then shader right here. So under Arnold and then shader. And you'll see these options right here. So there's approximately 25 options in here or something like that, 20. And I'm going to scroll towards the bottom, and there's this material right here called AI Standard Surface. And the vast majority of the time in this class, when I'm creating a material, I'm going right here. And so it's the one that's got the gray sphere on it with a little tiny A in the top right corner on the icon. So I just click on that. And over here, the node view kind of comes up. And so I'm just holding Option or Alt if you're on a PC and using the middle mouse button and the right click button to kind of change my view of that. We don't really need to mess with that. We have the property editor, and then you can see the actual material shows up here as well. So let's go ahead and rename the surface. And remember, you're going to populate this room with a ton of objects. So it's super important to kind of name your materials here as you're moving along here. So I'm going to name this right here. Or if you want to rename it, you can also right click here and then go down to rename. So those are the 2 ways you can rename it. And I will just call this white plastic because that's kind of what this is going to look like. And I'm just going to assign that to everything in the scene. So I'm going to unhide everything just by selecting them all in my outliner and pressing H. And then I'm going to select everything in my scene right there. And then I'm going to find the white plastic material I just created, right click, assign material to selection. And this will all now be a Arnold shader. So back wall H, sidewall H. I'm going to keep the ceiling because the sunlight, the way I'm going to create is going to kind of come in through the top right here. I'm also going to hide my windows right here. So select those and press H. And so to start things off, what I like to do is I like to start with the area light here. So I'm just going to, and we could start with the skydome, it's really up to you, but let's start with the area light here. So I'm going to go to Arnold lights and then the area light right there to create the area light. The area light is like a little box and it'll show up in the middle of your scene right there. And I'll just press W to get the move controls and move it out to the side. When I'm repositioning my light, I like to use the orthographic view down here. So I'm just pressing this 4 view button right here. And this just helps me kind of reposition in a way where it lines up the way I want it to. And if I press F up here, it'll focus up on it. And you can see right now that the area light, it's light projecting in the direction that this little line is that my cursor's on top of. And so, for instance, if I were to press E on my keyboard to go into rotate mode, then hold J and rotate it in this direction, it would be lighting away from my room, and my room would be pitch black in there. So we want it to be positioned towards the room right here. So again, I'm just holding down J so that it rotates at 95-degree increments. You don't really need to do that here for this. You can see when I'm rotating it, this right now, this green line right here is showing me, indicating to me the direction that it's facing right there. I might like it to come in at a little bit of an angle, maybe like this. And so we'll see here. And so the area light, this is something that trips a lot of people up here, is so the area light, I've created it. And if I were to render this now, it's going to show up as pitch black, even though I've created a light. So you go to Arnold and then render right here. And I've got a pitch black render right there. And the reason for that is if I select my light right here, and I might just double click it in my outliner and name it sun right there. And I go to the attribute editor. Right now the intensity is at 1. And this is a pretty large scene right here. And even if you drag the slider all the way to the top, it's not, this is still going to be a pitch black render. 10 is not nearly enough. For this particular example, we're going to need a number like 95,000. So I don't know why they do this. The slider should just go up higher than that. But what you have to do is you have to go under intensity, type in 95, and then 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3. And now this thing has at least a chance of, lighting this room. Okay, it's still going to be really dark, but it's going to at least create that initial light right there. So I'm going to go to Arnold and then render. So there we go. You can see that light is kind of pouring in through those windows right there, which is a lot of what I'm shooting for here. And we can see this render is still really grainy. That's fine. We want that because that means the renders are going to happen quickly, and we're not going to have to sit here and wait 20 minutes to see what changes are being made here. Remember, in the Arnold render view, if you click this button right here, it takes a snapshot of your render in its current state. So we can kind of keep track of our progress here just by taking snapshots along the way. And so that's honestly looking pretty good to me. Let me move this out of the way. So one really important thing here is with the area light, the two most important controls in my mind are the intensity as well as how you have it angled. I guess those two are probably the most important. And then the next most important thing is right now this light is pretty small right here. And if you think about sunlight, the sun relative to us in the sky is a really small light source, like physically in the sky. It's like, look small up there because it's so far away. And when a light is small, it creates really hard shadows. And so that's why if you're walking around on a bright sunny day in the summer at noon and you look at your shadow, it's going to be a pretty sharp shadow happening there. So most of the time the sun casts pretty hard shadows. So you're going to want this to be a small light. And then if the light is large like this, it's going to start creating softer shadows. So if you're ever on a photo shoot, especially for like a product shoot or something like that, they'll use softbox lights, which kind of diffuse the light and make it kind of come from a larger region like that. And so now if we click on Arnold and then render again, it's down here, and I need to let this re-render. Here we go. So you can see that those shadows right there as that's starting to come in are way softer, as we scale that up, that light up. So I'm going to press the snapshot again so we can compare. So this is with the area light small. This is that same area light, didn't change the intensity at all or anything. I just made it larger right there. And so most of the time, sunlight is going to be small. And the time where it might appear a little bit larger is, let's say, for instance, you're having a cloudy day. That works the clouds work as a diffuser, and they make the light come from a larger surface area because the sunlight hits the cloud diffuses it, and it kind of comes out from a larger area like that. So that's one example where you might take your sunlight and make it a little larger here. So we have our sunlight here. I'm gonna make it relatively small again. And position that. And let's try this render again. So Arnold render. So that's kind of what I want for the scene, essentially right here. So that's looking okay to me. And so next up, I'm going to create my second light in the scene. And that's going to be a skydome light. So for an HDRI skydome light, I have my project folder right here, which is on my desktop. So this is 3D project 2. I double click it. We have, when we went to set project, we have the folders here, source images. And under source images, I have all of my HDRI images. So if you don't have HDRI images already, be sure to go online to the D2L. I have a whole library of them available up there, as well as a website called Polyhaven that's got hundreds of options of these. And so whatever picture you choose right here is going to create a skydome wrapping around your whole scene. And the areas where this is bright, so if I use this one, for example, it almost appears if a light was shining from here and a light was shining from there, and it just helps add a lot of realism to your scene here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this one for my scene right here, which is one that I downloaded off of Polyhaven. So for the skydome light, I'm just going to go to, and so before I create it, the reason I created the area light first is in my particular scene, that light pouring in through the windows, to me, the most important light that's going to determine the most about my composition and things like that. And so whenever I'm creating lights, I kind of try to think about what light is going to be the most important, and I start with that one. And then when I'm creating my next lights, I create them in a way that accommodates the main light that I created. So I'm going to create a skydome light. So I'm going to go to Arnold, lights, same place where we created the area light, except for just one down to the skydome light. And so right now by default, it just projects white from every direction, which can be helpful sometimes, but it's not what we want right now. And so I'm going to attach that HDRI to it. So I look for the color right here, look for that checker box. I click the checker box. This window will come up. On this side, I go 4 down to where it says file because I'm attaching a file. Instead of choosing a broad color, I'm attaching my own file to it. So file. And then one more step is my attribute editor should now look like this. You're going to click on this folder right here, and we're going to go find the image we want to use. So I'm going to use the Brown Photo Studio.exr and press open. And so now this is going to be projecting that from every direction. And this might end up being too bright here, but we'll see. So let's just go ahead and try an approximate render here. And yeah, that's like I don't know, that's pretty good. So that's my room right now. And so let's just say that the skydome light is too bright. Right here, I'll take one more snapshot of this just to kind of continue to monitor the progress that's happening here. And so we can see before, this is my first render, second render. And when I add that skydome light, you can see a lot of like the realism is starting to kind of come out, as we progress here. And with the skydome light, if I want to make that less powerful right here, you can see the intensity is at 1. And in this case, 1 for a skydome light is already pretty powerful. So when you're changing your skydome light, you're not really going to want to go too high with this. You're either going to want to punch it down a little bit by going down to like 0.5 or 0.7 or something like that. So 0.7. And the highest that I'd ever want this, I would imagine, would be something like 3 to 5. If you're getting into 10 or something like that, you're going way too high. It depends on the skydome light, but you can see right there, I moved it up to 3, and my scene's starting to get blown out right here. So I might just do 0.9 on this one right here. And that's looking okay to me. So we only have 2 more steps here, essentially. And this next one's really important here is I'm going to create my camera. I'm going to position it, and then I'm going to create my atmosphere. And then we'll kind of have what we need here for this this demonstration. So I'm just going to save my scene real quick. And so to create a camera, you just go to create, go down to cameras, and then find, oops, camera right there. So just create camera, camera. And it creates a camera in the middle of the scene right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to physically move it up. And so you can position your camera like that, but you can't see through it right now, right? What we want to be able to do is be able to look through the camera. And so to look through the camera, you just go up to here to say where it says panels, perspective, and then camera right there. And if you don't see this panel up here, you just have to, it's in your system preferences. So if you don't see view, shading, light, show, render panels up here, if you go up to Windows, settings, preferences right here, and then we look at interface right here, it's going to be, where's the UI elements? Here we go. So under preferences, under interface, it's this right here. So if you ever don't see that, just, you see it disappeared right there. If you keep your eye up there, and then if I click it again, it'll show up. So if that's ever missing, just, that's where you find it. And so that aside, to look through this camera, we just go to panels, perspective, go down to camera. So now I'm looking through the camera and I can reposition it here. And I'm just moving it the same way I would normally move my perspective. And there's a bunch of reasons that we create a camera here. So chief among which is I have the option to lock it right here. So I can, for instance, switch over to my 2-view mode, switch this perspective to my camera view, which is locked now. And then I still have my perspective mode right here, so I can continue to kind of look around my scene and reposition things and have my render delegated over to this side. So that's one thing that's really helpful. Additionally, something I really like to change in my scene is the focal length. But before we do that, one super important button when you're setting up your camera is the resolution gate, which is right here. So I'll click on that. I'm going to press 5 just to go back to shaded mode here. So it's this button right here. And what this does is if I were to render this right now, the edge of my composition would come up to here, 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 and here. So it kind of shows us what's going to actually render. If you don't have it pressed, you're going to be looking at it like this. And then when it renders, it's going to crop it off in a way that you're not expecting. So that's another reason I like to have kind of my own separate camera setup, because having the resolution gate up in your perspective mode can be pretty distracting. And then finally, one of my favorite things is changing the focal length. And so the focal length, I have my camera selected, and so it's under the attribute editor right here. And so if I change my focal length down to, by default is at 35. If I change it down to 10, my room, the perspective gets exaggerated right here. And so small rooms begin to look way larger right here, if you look at that. So if you're trying to kind of exaggerate the size of the space, or kind of fit a camera into a small space, like a lot of the times realtors use wide angle lenses to kind of make the house that they're selling look bigger. So 10 is, pretty over the top right here, but something like 20 can be really, really good here. And additionally, so 35 is the default. If we switch it to 85 millimeters is a focal length that's usually used for like portraits of people. And you can see the space really shrinks here. Perspective, you can, if I put this to like 125, for instance, space gets really shrunk right there. And it almost looks like the room goes from looking like a room to almost like a toy box right here. And so for this, I'm going to have it at 25. And I'm going to select my room, press F to just focus in on it. And I'm going to try to find an angle that looks the most interesting to me here. And once you have something that you like, you can just press this lock button and then it's locked up right there. One final thing, I know I'm waxing on poetic a lot about this camera here, but one final thing I really like about cameras is we can add depth of field, which is a technique that I'll show later in the class. And that looks super cool in a lot of renders right there. And you can't really do that in perspective mode. Okay, so I have my camera locked. Let's just check what the render looks like from this angle. I've come up with better angles in my day, but this is okay, I think. Let me just one thing that's nice too is with the camera, you can go back to your perspective view, find the camera right here, then just rotate it a little bit. And you can do things like change the rotation so that it's totally flat facing forward right there. And just kind of have it be level if it needs to be leveled. So let me just a little bit more. Okay, so I think this is going to be a little bit more to my taste right here. So be really careful when setting up your compositions right here, because it's so important to these renders just to kind of get a good composition and have things set up in a way that you like. And something that's nice about setting up a camera early on and then locking it is that now when I'm building out my scene, I'm building it to this angle, and so it's going to end up being a really well thought out environment here when we kind of skip ahead to the final render. Once this room gets populated with objects and textured and things like that. Okay, so one more part coming here. So I'm just going to save this, and I'm going to create the atmosphere. So creating the atmosphere is actually a pretty easy step. So where am I? Oh, I flipped my scene upside down. So we have the hypershade right here, which is where we created materials, things like that. And then just one to the left of it is the render settings, which is a kind of a render icon with a little gear on it. So render settings. This will come up. We have 5 tabs at the top. Hopefully it should say Arnold Render right here. So make sure this is Arnold Render and not Maya Software. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to tab number 2, which is Arnold Render right here. And we're going to go down. We have all these different tabs in here. And we're going to go down to where it says environment right here. So we're in the second tab, Arnold Render, and then down under environment. And then we have atmosphere right here. So it says atmosphere. There's a blank dark gray box right there. And then a little checkerboard box right here. So right now there's no atmosphere happening. So to create an atmosphere, we just click on this checker box and hold it down. So a normal click, hold it down, and there's 3 options right here. There's kind of 3 forms of atmosphere you can create. And what we're going to want is the first one, which is create AI atmosphere volume. So we click on that, and it's going to create the volume. Just for future reference, you can see that it creates the atmosphere right there. And if you ever want to, you create the atmosphere and you decide you don't like it, it's really easy to delete it. You just go to the same checkerboard box, click, hold it down, and then you go down to delete. And so you can get rid of it. And we're back to where we started. So AI atmosphere volume right there. We can see with the attribute editor that it's selected by default up here. If you ever are trying to work on your atmosphere and then you click off of it, you can see that it goes away. So where do you find the atmosphere again? It's under your hypershade. So if you click on the hypershade and we look in the hypershade, we have the white plastic material that we made it, but we also can see right next to it, we have the AI atmosphere volume right there under the hypershade. So I'm just going to click on it so that it highlights yellow right there. And you can see that we have the parameters down here that we're going to adjust. And so by default, it's not going to show up when I render right here. Nothing happened. You can see it's rendering from my perspective view. So just click right here and switch it to camera so that it renders from your camera view. And so in order to get this to show up, all you need to mess with is the density slider right here. That's really all you need with the atmosphere here. If I drag it up too high, so I'm at 0.02, and this is already a little over the top right here, right? So if we click this up to even, so 1 is the max right here. And the bigger you're seeing, the easier this is going to be to dial in. But probably what you're going to need to do, like what's the case for me here, is I'm going to need to type in my own number here. So for me, and again, this depends on the size of your scene, how much light is in your scene, all that stuff. I'll type in 0. Let's see, 0.15. Let's see what that looks like. That's still a lot. Okay, so I did 0.005. So I'm trying these different values right here. And one thing that happens a lot with renders is as you're kind of working in your scene, it's most of the time we're going to need to go in and kind of be adjusting our different light sources right here. So I'm going to try to get this atmosphere to something that I like right here. So I'm just trying just incrementally, just punching up the value little by little here until I find something that I think looks good. And this is starting to kind of look about the way that I want it to look right here. And let me just let this, I'm going to allow this to render just for a moment here. Okay. So you can see this is the camera view without the atmosphere right here. This is the camera view with the atmosphere, right? This is a big improvement that happens here. And so one thing we might want to do here is looking at this, I might like to think about my different light sources, how much intensity there is and all that stuff. So I have my attribute editor over here. I'm going to click this button to get out of the snapshot view. So I can make my sun less powerful and it'll kind of change the amount of light rays that are coming in there. So it feels like a little too powerful. So under the intensity on my sunlight, which is my area light, I might just drag that down just a little bit, not too much. I'm not going to go crazy with this. And then same for the skydome light. I'll just click on the skydome light and take its intensity down just a little bit. Let's try something like 0.5 because I just kind of want my room to be a little bit darker here. And I'll let this render just for another moment. And yeah, so you make little adjustments here and there just to kind of have this look the way that you want it to look here. I think I like this where things were closer to where they were. So 0.7 for the skydome light. I'll do the sun and I'll just bring that back up just a little bit. Notice that the slider now works. When you type in a big number right there, the slider moves to become relative to where you typed it in here. So by default, I think the top intensity is 10, but then I typed in 95,000. And so now the slider goes up to, numbers relative to that. So I'm just going to let this render for another moment. And so from here, you're just kind of making adjustments. So, for instance, I might like my light rays to kind of come into the room from a different angle. So if I wanted that to happen, I would just select my volume light right here and just kind of change the angle a little bit. If I wanted to go a little bit, if I wanted that light ray to kind of angle down just a little bit more, you're just kind of making adjustments like that. So yeah, and that brings us to the end of the tutorial here. If coming up, I'll make another tutorial going over how to make the window frames and things like that. If you remember looking at the render that I showed at the beginning of class, and if you don't remember, you can, after I say this, you can kind of scroll back to the beginning of the tutorial, is I had a window frame in here and it kind of chops up the light in a bunch of different slices right here. And essentially what that does is that creates really interesting light rays right here. So I'm not going to actually render out or model a window frame here yet in this tutorial, but I'm just going to temp it in right here just by creating like a really rough cylinder just so that we have some kind of object to break up the light sources right here. Okay, so I just temp that in real rough right there, but you can see right here that by having those windowsills in there, just having more things for the light to kind of cut through, you can start to kind of, the composition becomes way more interesting right here. So I'll kind of go over how to properly model a windowsill here, but I just wanted to show real quick that when you have that kind of cutting up the light right there, you can start to get some really fun, interesting compositions going on here. And so I'll save that snapshot right there. So just to kind of track our progress this is where we started. And as we just kind of punch through, you can see we went from having an area light right there, kind of creating the sunlight. Here I created the skydome light, so now there's that atmospheric light coming through, or sorry, that not atmospheric, but environmental light coming through. And then here we kind of set up our camera angle to a camera angle that we like, which is a big improvement over something like that, right? And then here started to experiment with adding in the atmosphere. Or kind of made adjustments to the atmosphere, so it was a little too bright at first, so I just kind of took the light and dialed it back just a little bit. And you can see here, I started to create windowsills in there to kind of break up the light, and that made a big improvement right there. You can see the sunlight, the rays coming through and kind of hitting the atmosphere. So that can add a really interesting component to it here. So that's the end of that tutorial there. And next up, we're gonna go over, continue to populate. I'll show you how to model things to kind of continue to put into this environment. Things like the windowsill, how to model that, and things like that.